Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Oshkosh, Wisconsin was a small and quaint town in 1981. That's where today's episode takes place. And more specifically, we're starting at a Sears department store. That's where Mark Jensen and Julie Griffin found themselves working side by side. Mark sold suits, and Julie worked the floor in various departments. They struck up a friendship, chatting about life and the future, when they realized they both attended the same school, the University of Wisconsin. Mark was trying to follow in his father's footsteps by pursuing a career in finance. He wanted to be a stockbroker. Julie, on the other hand, wanted to be a nurse. The two fell fast in love and stuck together through the rest of their school years. 3 years after they first met, wedding bells were ringing. It was 1984, and the happy couple recited their vows before friends and family, promising to love and serve each other till death do them part. While their marriage would have its fair share of ups and downs, they welcomed 2 sons. David was born in 1990, and Douglas arrived 5 years later, in 1995. Julie centered her life around her boys, which she nicknamed My 3 Ds: Daddy, which was Mark, David, and Douglas. It was a huge part of her identity, and she even showcased it on her car with a personalized license plate with the same phrase, My 3 Ds. Mark frequently traveled out of town for work, while Julie and the kids stayed at their home in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. Julie often hosted a book club and volunteered at the boys' elementary school each week. But as the years would come and go, more fault lines would begin to show in the Jensens' picturesque life. And in December 1998, everything would boil over.
Prior to 1998, till December 3rd, 1998, the Jensen family was just like any other family. They had good days. They had bad days. The Jensens were a middle-class family. They loved their boys, and they worked hard to build what they had.
The once happy couple would live out their vows to their fullest extent, till death do them part. This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 241. The cracks in the Jensens' marriage first began to show back in 1990, shortly after the birth of their first child, David. A prosecutor would later explain in court.
Now, that's a big transition time in a marriage, the time before kids and the time after kids. And it caused some issues in the Jensen marriage.
Julie felt that Mark wasn't involved with David enough. She had returned to work part-time, which was also a difficult transition.
And Julie Jensen during that time was suffering from some postpartum depression. And she went to a psychotherapist.
Julie was prescribed an antidepressant. After several months, Julie reportedly continued to find herself consistently alone, left to take care of the couple's baby by herself, while Mark, when he wasn't traveling, made time for going out, drinking, and partying. She couldn't help but feel like he resented her for the attention she was giving to baby David. Here's Julie's brother testifying about their relationship.
he was traveling a lot. He was staying overnight, like in Chicago when he could be home with the family. And he was always out, always gone, and drinking a lot, talking about getting drunk on business trips.
Growing up, Julie was the oldest child in a family with 5 brothers. For some of her brothers, she was a second mother figure. Their mother struggled with alcoholism, and as Julie grew older, it was something she was very careful about. In 1991, Julie decided to file for divorce, but Mark, according to family, had refused to sign the papers and instead agreed to attend couples counseling as an alternative. Julie agreed to give it a try. While undergoing counseling, Mark's work picked up. There were more trips away from home and longer hours at the office, and Julie was working part-time at a local brokerage firm. She made friends fast, as she often did, and one coworker captured her attention. His name was Perry Tarika. They chatted often and became close. So close, in fact, that on one weekend when Mark was jetting off for yet another work trip, Julie invited Perry over to the Jensens' Pleasant Prairie home for a simple dinner. But what she may have assumed was just a casual get-together quickly got out of hand. What ensued was a weekend-long affair. As the next week started and Mark arrived home, Julie was reportedly filled with regret. She attempted to remedy the situation quickly, pulling Perry aside to explain how that weekend tryst could never happen again, and she even ended up quitting her job at the firm altogether. Julie eventually told Mark about what had happened and withdrew her request to file for divorce. According to several of her brothers, although she most likely didn't want to stay in the marriage, she felt she needed to stay for their son. With the worst behind them, the Jensens were turning a new leaf, or so they thought. Shortly after Julie told Mark about the affair, strange things began happening around the Jensens' home. Someone began calling the house all the time with harassing messages. And on top of that, sexually explicit photographs were showing up outside the house, printed out on computer paper. The pictures were found everywhere, including the mailbox, the driveway, front door, and on occasion inside their home. They were graphic. Male and female genitalia were featured in most of the images, and they were placed on the exterior of the home for all the world to see. The Jensens phoned the local Pleasant Prairie Police Department for help with the calls and photos. Julie had a sneaking suspicion it was Perry, getting revenge for their fling that had been cut dry. But police confirmed that Perry had moved states away, making it nearly impossible to harass them almost daily. Julie grew more worried as the local police ran out of ideas. She wasn't positive, but she even thought some of the photos could be of her, although she was confused on how they had been taken if so. Officer Ron Kosman from the Pleasant Prairie Police Department was assigned to handle the complaints from the Jensens, and he tried and failed to identify the harasser. The calls and the pictures didn't just last a week or a month. This harassment went on, without answers, for years. Officer Kosman himself responded to about 30 calls to police made by the Jensens between 1992 and 1998. The Jensens also hired their own private detective, David Ellis, to get to the bottom of it. His investigation turned up inconclusive as well, but he knew one thing: the photos weren't of Julie. They were pictures from the internet or pictures from a magazine. Ellis would later say that whoever was behind the harassment was obviously trying to intimidate Julie. He said he shared his theory on who it was with her, who wasn't completely sold on the idea. Julie just couldn't wrap her head around something so diabolical and odd.
And were you open with Mrs. Jensen about your reasoning here?
Yes.
And so how did she respond to that?
She was a little kind of wishy-washy about it. She said, well, because I had specifically asked her if she entertained the thought that her husband was behind it. And she reluctantly said, well, yes, I've thought that, but I really don't want to go down that road and think that he would do that.
The couple ended up calling off the investigation. Perhaps the notion that her own husband, Mark Jensen, was behind it was too much to bear. The years came and went. The Jensen kids were growing up, and Mark and Julie stayed together. It was 1998 now, and Mark accepted a new job 30 minutes away from home at a big financial firm. While he was consumed with work, Julie was thriving with the community and with the friendships she had made in Pleasant Prairie. She hosted a book club at her house each week, spoke frequently with neighbors, and managed to volunteer every Wednesday at David's elementary school. But when the bitter Wisconsin winter was at its peak in December of 1998, Julie's health took an unexpected turn. She was dealing with depression again, and on the first of the month, she went to the family doctor. Having known the Jensens for quite some time, he gave Julie some samples of different kinds of antidepressants to try, and noted that she had lost several pounds since her last visit in September. By the following day, Julie's energy had declined, but it was Mark who paid the doctor a visit, explaining that now Julie was having trouble resting. The doctor sent him home with tablets of Ambien. On December 3rd, Julie was so visibly weak that even David, now age 8, and Douglas, age 3, took notice. David asked what was wrong with his mother and questioned if Mark would be able to take her to the hospital. Mark reassured the boys that she would be fine and simply needed rest. He would be taking them to school that day. David's teacher was surprised to learn that Julie wasn't feeling well. She never missed a volunteer day. Julie called the neighbors, sharing that she was under the weather after taking medicine, but insisted that everything was okay and Mark was taking good care of her. But by that afternoon, when Mark picked up the boys from school to take them home, things were much worse. When they got to the house, Mark told them to wait in the living room until he could check on Julie. When he entered the bedroom, he discovered that his wife of 14 years was dead. He would later say that he assumed that after years of struggling with her mental health, everything had come to a devastating end. When investigators arrived on the scene, they were shocked to find no visible signs pointing to Julie's cause of death. Nothing was out of place in the home, and she didn't have any visible marks on her to indicate that anything sinister had happened. They treated it as a crime scene nonetheless. Mark gave the investigators full permission to search the home and to bag any evidence needed in the process. Some of the items taken from the Jensen's family home included the new IBM computer. It was new territory for investigators, who at the time seldom saw home desktops. In the days after Julie's passing, friends and family reeled from the news. Mark appeared to be sure that his wife had died by suicide after her long struggle with depression, but others weren't so convinced.
What was weird is I'm literally devastated. And he talked like it was just a conversation, just no feeling, no emotion, just kind of matter of fact. What he said to me kind of sounded rehearsed. It was to me, it was very bizarre.
Investigators got to work trying to figure out why Julie Jensen, who was just 40 years old at the time, had suddenly died. With no real cause of death coming from the examination of her body, they began to focus on the family computer. It would take months to get analysis on it back, but when they did, it cracked the whole investigation wide open. The desktop, which was primarily used by Mark, revealed a name that was new to everyone working on the case: Kelly Labonte. Many emails and private instant messages were shared between Mark and Kelly during 1998. By the looks of it, they had a romantic relationship and often spoke about eventually being together, just the two of them.
In fact, in one of these emails from October of 1998, the defendant refers to Kelly Labonte as his girlfriend. And they end the emails frequently, almost all the time, with IDLY. I do love you.
Kelly had been a co-worker of Mark's. She didn't live in Wisconsin at the time, but in St. Louis, where Mark would often take business trips. Based off the emails recovered from the computer, their friendship had begun in August of 1998, and at some point after that, it became physical. Kelly was engaged to another man at the time, and the two reportedly bonded over sharing their relationship struggles. Unbeknownst to investigators at the time, shortly after Julie's funeral, Kelly left her new husband to move in with Mark, David, and Douglas at the Pleasant Prairie home. Julie's brother described meeting Kelly about a month after his sister's death.
So on January 21st, 1999, or thereabouts, within a day or two of January 21st, 1999, Kelly Labonte was introduced to you?
Yes.
Had you ever seen her or met her before?
No, that was the first time.
And who introduced you to Kelly Labonte?
Mark.
And how did he describe Kelly Labonte when he introduced you to her?
He said she was a friend from work.
Did you make any observations about Kelly Labonte while you were at the residence on
Yes.
January 21st? What observations did you make about Kelly Labonte?
She was very familiar and very comfortable with the house, including the master bedroom. And she was also very bossy to the kids. And I remember I was irritated by that, just feeling like someone has replaced my sister.
Investigators called Mark in for questioning in April 1999, armed with questions that only he could answer. When confronted with the emails he had sent to Kelly, Mark said she was just a friend.
Second part of the interview, he was starting to open up a little bit about Kelly, but still understating or actually misrepresenting the nature of the relationship.
Yes.
By this time, investigators also had a hunch that it was Mark who had been harassing Julie with the lewd photographs and menacing phone calls.
You were trying to get Mr. Jensen to acknowledge his participation in this long-term, years-long harassment of Julie.
Yes.
And he did own up to some of it,
Yes.
but he didn't own up to all of it.
Correct.
He was still denying that he was the source of these photos.
Yes.
And he indicated at that time that he'd received some of them in the mail at the office, correct?
Yes.
And you talked to people at his office, right?
I did.
And none of them ever saw any photos like that in the mail.
That is correct. Yes.
Mark denied it, but he did admit to finding some pictures that had been left outside and then placing them inside the home for Julie to find. Then the investigators handed Mark an envelope with Julie's handwriting on it. Detective Ratzberg, who was leading the interview, said it was a letter Julie had left for the detectives who had been investigating the harassing phone calls and pictures. Mark read the letter, which was captured by the cameras recording the interview. It had been written a little over a week before Julie's death. "If anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect," she wrote. "Our relationship has deteriorated to the polite superficial. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with the creep 7 years ago. Anyway, I do not smoke or drink. Mark wants me to drink more with him in the evenings. I don't. I would never take my life because of my kids. They are everything to me. I pray I'm wrong and nothing happens," she wrote. but I am suspicious of Mark's suspicious behaviors and fear for my early demise. Attached to the letter was a picture of a shopping list that she said she had found in Mark's planner. Items on the list included drug supply and syringes. The letter had been handed over by the Jensens' neighbors, Ted and Margaret Voigt. They said Julie had given it to them and instructed them to turn it over to the police if anything were to happen to her. Despite this letter, Mark still denied that he had anything to do with his wife's death.
We need to find out what happened here.
Oh, I did not do anything to hurt her. There was a question between myself and the kids that morning whether or not to call an ambulance. Her breathing was funny. She could hardly get out of bed. I mean, it was a god-awful situation.
I have been doing this 15 years, Mark, and I've never had anybody leave me a letter telling me that if they die, it's this person that killed me.
In the meantime, the search history from the Jensens' family computer was recovered by investigators. Deleted search history showed over 2 months of searches looking into antifreeze poisoning. Whoever had been using the computer was apparently unaware that although search history could be deleted, everything was always stored on the hard drive. An autopsy previously done on Julie had come up inconclusive. Antifreeze, or more scientifically known as ethylene glycol, isn't something that is regularly looked for, but upon seeing the deleted search history, investigators asked the lab to test Julie's body again, this time specifically looking for the chemical. Sure enough, traces of the substance were found in her stomach and in her blood. The district attorney at the time, Robert Jamboys, struggled for years trying to figure out how charges could be brought against Mark Jensen for the death of his wife. Despite the letter from Julie, there was still no concrete physical evidence pointing to him. Meanwhile, Mark was living his life with his kids and Kelly Labonte. Family and friends were reportedly shocked when Mark and Kelly announced their engagement in the local newspaper. But in March 2002, Mark was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. His bond was set to $500,000, and he posted it almost immediately. Years passed while he waited to go on trial, and Mark and Kelly got married, later welcoming a child of their own. In 2007, pre-trial interviews began, where numerous friends and family of both Mark and Julie were interviewed. One of the people brought in was a former co-worker of Mark's, named Edward Klug. Klug told the courtroom that he and Mark worked together back in 1998 and would often grab dinner together on work trips. One trip to St. Louis in November 1998 had always stuck out to him. He said they had been grabbing drinks one night, complaining about problems in their marriages, when Mark suddenly got sinister.
Mark was talking about how to get rid of the problem. Basically, the websites that you could go to search how to kill your wife. And it was just like the craziest thing that I ever heard that, an educated person would say something like that. And then he was talking about poisons and Benadryl and, things that could be undetectable.
So what was the problem that Mark Jensen had in his life when he was saying these things to you?
Well, the problem was he didn't want to pay maintenance. He, wanted to have everything and have his new friend, Kelly, move in with him.
And so the problem was his wife?
That's correct.
According to Edward Klug, Mark even advised him to visit the site howtokillyourwife.com. Klug didn't take it seriously, and even if he did, he had just been hired at the company months prior, and Mark was technically his boss. Who would believe him? After hearing this testimony, the judge, Judge Bruce Schroeder, decided that this brought the case to another height. he decided to raise Mark's bail while in the courtroom, and Mark was immediately taken into custody again. The trial experienced numerous delays. The most heated argument when it came time to preparing the case was if Julie's letter would be used in court. Under the Sixth Amendment, which grants you the right to confront your accuser, a letter of this magnitude wouldn't have been admissible, with Julie's death occurring 10 years prior. It was a dispute that would make its way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which would later decide that Julie's letter was admissible. The court cited a U.S. Supreme Court ruling which declared that evidence like Julie's letter could be used in the case under the basis of forfeiture by wrongdoing, which allowed the rights of someone to be able to confront their accuser to be waived if the defendant possibly played a role in the person being absent from the trial. And so the jury would hear from Julie herself, but it was up to them to decide if the letter had painted an accurate picture. The trial lasted for 6 weeks in 2008. The prosecution argued that Mark had tormented his wife for years with the pornographic images and menacing phone calls before finally killing her off so he could start a new life with his mistress. Mark's defense team argued that Julie killed herself after suffering from depression for most of her adult life. The letter she had left behind was her attempting to frame him for murder, they said, in order to get revenge on him for his affair with Kelly Labonte. After deliberating for 32 hours, the jury found Mark Jensen guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that's where the story ended initially. But Mark's team went to work on the appeals process, with Julie's letter at the heart of their argument. They stated that the letter should never have been used as evidence. In March 2021, the Wisconsin Supreme Court agreed with that argument and ruled that Julie's letter should not have been used as evidence against him in his trial. And so, about 15 years later, Mark Jensen was headed back to the courtroom. The testimony in Mark Jensen's second trial, which took place in January 2023, was almost a repeat of the 2008 trial, minus Julie's letter, of course. It was now 25 years after Julie's death. The prosecution painted Mark as a murderous husband, determined to get rid of Julie and live happily ever after with his mistress. The prosecutor implied that any mental health issues the defense would try to present aren't relevant and go all the way back to 1990.
So in this trial, if you hear about Julie Jensen's history of depression, that this is a suicide because she had a history of depression, well, that's it. The postpartum depression and seasonal affective disorder when the seasons change, like fall, that she was treated for 1 year in 1990 to 1991. Julie Jensen did not have a history of suicide attempts. She did not have suicidal ideation. She had no suicide plans. And what a therapist is supposed to do, what you'll hear in the evidence, is ask someone, if they have signs of depression, to ask that person about risk of suicide. At no time did Julie Jensen ever say she was contemplating suicide. And in fact, she would cite her children. She could never do it because of her kids.
She said after Julie had her weekend-long affair, everything changed in the Jensen marriage, and Mark never got over it.
And by the way, there's no obligation to forgive a spouse for an affair. That's not required. Sometimes affairs break relationships, they break marriages. When that happens, divorce is always an option. Forgiveness is not required. But Mark Jensen did not file for a divorce. Instead, he engaged in a campaign of covert harassment directed at his wife to degrade her and gratify him. In a case that is full of strange facts, this harassment over the course of years is perhaps the strangest.
She said investigators discovered that the emails were actually coming from Mark himself. As for the murder, she said his affair with Kelly was the motive.
Because the defendant began having an affair with her in around September of 1998. And this was a very serious relationship. Because shortly after Julie Jensen's death, just in the weeks after, Kelly Labonte would come to Pleasant Prairie to visit. She would stay at the defendant's house. Soon thereafter, she moved to Wisconsin. She remained in a relationship with the defendant for years after Julie's death. She married him. She had a child with him. And they were together until about 2009 when they divorced.
She said Julie talked to her neighbors about Mark's unusual behavior in the weeks leading up to her death.
Now, these doctor visits are important because leading up to them, Julie Jensen had talked to Ted Voigt and described a strange experience where the defendant had very persistently tried to get her to drink some wine. And it just wasn't normal. These were people who had been together with each other for years. And the defendant didn't commonly offer Julie Jensen food and drink like that. She was the homemaker. That was her job. And so Julie described this unusual behavior from the defendant and how her not wanting to drink the wine had actually led to a huge fight between them. It was just another thing on the list of strange things that happened in the weeks before Julie's death.
She told the jury that Mark's plan was to poison Julie, and she told them how he enacted it.
Now, the defendant had this ideal drug to enact his plan. Ethylene glycol has a sweet taste to it, and it's the kind of thing that won't be detected at autopsy. But he has to have a way to slip it to Julie, and being persistent and aggressive about it wasn't working. But now Julie's got this new medication, and he's taking care of her. And these effects from this ethylene glycol can be passed off as side effects of the new medication. And once Julie starts getting well and truly sick from this poison, the defendant now has Ambien to give her day and night to drug her senseless. And Julie did get truly sick.
She said on the day Julie died, Mark took the kids to daycare and then came back home. He needed for her to die quickly, she said, because their 8-year-old son was concerned enough that he wanted his dad to take her to the hospital. She said a jailhouse snitch, Aaron Dillard, told investigators what happened next.
And what Aaron Dillard said is that the defendant, he took the kids to school and to daycare, which is true. And the defendant returned home, but Julie Jensen was not dead. She was non-responsive. She was incoherent, but the defendant feared that she was actually breathing better. And so he first rolls her onto her face with her face in the pillow. And then he leaves the room, kind of hoping that that will do the job. But when the defendant returned to the room, Julie Jensen was still alive. And so he got on top of her. He pushed her face and her neck into a pillow. He sat on her back so she could not breathe, causing the pressure on her arm that she was laying on, causing the subcutaneous bruising. And then she died. That is the description that Aaron Dillard tells of what Mark Jensen told him.
Mark's attorney, Mackenzie Renner, told the jury that it wasn't murder, but suicide.
On December 3rd, 1998, Mark Jensen found his wife in their bedroom, motionless. He called 911. When paramedics and the police arrived, they found a distraught mess of a man in Mark Jensen. His eyes were red from the tears streaming down his face. There was snot bubbling up from his grief. He had trouble standing while talking to the police and to the paramedics, trying to explain what was going on. And he directed them to the back bedroom.
She told the jury that Mark was not behind the harassing photos and phone calls.
In the following years, you heard about these pornographic pictures left around the home, a constant reminder of the infidelity. Yet, at the time, everyone believed those to be sent by Mr. Tariqa, who's the person that Miss Jensen had the affair with. On advice of police, Mr. Jensen hired a private investigator to get to the bottom of these photos. And I believe you're going to hear, and the evidence will show, that Mr. Jensen was not leaving these photos around to be found, to be harassing.
She acknowledged that Julie had mental health issues back in 1990, but she said she was still dealing with them leading up to her death.
But here's the thing. Mental illnesses don't just go away. You're going to hear multiple witnesses talk about things that Julie Jensen said to them. One of the stories you're going to hear is that there was a day when Julie Jensen was caring for her children at home, as well as other children in her home. When she called the parents of one of these children, one of her best friends, Laura Coster, and said, "Your son just smeared feces all over my bathroom." Laura called Mark, and both of them rushed home to figure out what was going on. Yet when they got there, there's no feces all over the bathroom. There's no smell of cleaning products or anything that would have explained why it's not there anymore. You're going to hear that that was the point when Laura Coster decided that maybe Julie shouldn't be caring for my child anymore.
She said there was another time in the weeks before her death when Julie was at her dentist's office, crying and upset, saying she wanted to take her life.
What brings us here today is Julie Jensen's suicide. The suicide of a woman who was in declining mental health, who was seeing her family doctor, a family practice doctor, for prescriptions for her mental illness, for her depression, not a psychiatrist. And as you listen to the evidence, at the very end of this trial, you're going to be asked to answer one question. Did the state prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Jensen caused Julie's death? Or did they prove to you that Mark Jensen wasn't a great husband and was kind of a jerk? Because those are two very different things.
Therese DeFazio, David Jensen's third-grade teacher, was one of the first witnesses to take the stand. She told the court that she knew Julie through her volunteer work. DeFazio was one of a string of witnesses who would testify in the trial about things Julie had said to them. She recalled that her first question to Julie was if she could possibly be any help working in the computer lab, which at the time was a learning curve for the general public.
And she says, "Oh, no, I can't do that." So then I questioned her some more about what she could do, and she helped me out then later on in the tutoring kids in the classroom.
She said Julie told her that they had an IBM computer at home, but she didn't even know how to turn it on. DeFazio said that as the year went on, Julie began to open up to her, and at one point confided that she was fearful of Mark and how he still held the brief affair she had had against her.
She said that he was watching everything she did and asking her where she was going when she'd go out, what time she'd be back. She says a lot more than he would normally. He was being very controlling over where she went and what she did.
DeFazio told the jury that Julie was visibly worried on November 25th, 1998. This was about a week prior to her death.
She hesitated to tell you anything?
She was hesitating, but then after I said to her that when you're ready to talk to me, that's fine. If you want me, I'm here. And she thought for a few seconds, and she says, well, I'd like to tell you something. I think my husband was going to kill me last weekend. And I looked at her surprised. I said, that's not something you hear from a parent. And I said, I repeated, I said, you said what? And she said that he was going to kill me. I said, you know what? We better have this conversation down in privacy in the teacher's lounge, because I didn't know if anybody could hear us from the side room. So we proceeded down to the lounge, in the teacher's lounge, to talk about it.
Just more privately?
Yes.
All right. So when you got to the teacher's lounge, describe that conversation for us.
Well, she said that she found some notes next to his. She was cleaning the house, and she cleaned in his room and his desk area there. And she found some notes there. It had list, like a grocery list. It had things like, she said, it had drugs, syringes. I think it even said needles. On like a grocery list. And I said, you're sure that those are his notes? She said, yes.
Julie told her that since she had seen those notes, she began to be fearful of eating or drinking anything Mark handed to her. Julie's friend, Carrie Ashley, testified that at her funeral, Mark didn't appear to be sad at all, but instead was laughing with friends. She also alleged that after Julie's funeral, some of her clothes were thrown in the garbage bins outside the front of the Jensens' home.
At some Monday after the wake, did you notice anything particular about the garbage outside the Jensen home?
There was just a lot more garbage bags, some big hefty bags out on the curb to be picked up, and there was some of Julie's belongings that weren't in bags, that were more spewed on the top, I guess.
And so can you give us an estimate of the time frame, how soon after the wake this was?
It would have been soon, so probably the next Monday.
And so you specifically described, was it more garbage bags than usual?
Yes.
And did you say you specifically saw some of Julie's things?
Yes.
Carrie testified that she was introduced to Kelly Labonte within a month after Julie's death. She had originally been told that Kelly was helping babysit the boys. The jury was also shown testimony from Margaret Voigt, a former neighbor of the Jensens who had since passed away after the 2008 trial. In the footage, Margaret described knowing the Jensens very well and said their families had dinner with each other several times. A few weeks prior to Julie's death, she said Julie had confided in her about her marriage. She remembered that Julie said she had suffered a miscarriage and after noticed a change in Mark.
One time she said that it was very strange that Mark would ask her how she felt after the miscarriage, and he would make a note about it. And she didn't know what that was all about. She was getting scared that he's planning something, and she didn't know what.
When was that conversation, if you can recall?
I would say within 2 weeks prior her Julie's death.
So maybe mid-November 1998?
Yes.
Did you know that Julie had a miscarriage?
Yes.
When did she have her miscarriage?
I don't remember, but I remember Mark bringing David over to my house that morning, and David, I had to take him to school later because he was taking Julie to a hospital.
Do you remember, was that the same year of Julie's death, or was it a year or two before, or don't you remember?
I don't remember.
She said it was strange because Mark didn't seem to regularly care about Julie at all. Margaret also described something else Julie said right before her death that alarmed her.
Another time I spoke to Julie relating the problems was that week before her death, like Monday and Tuesday. And one of the things was we mentioned the divorce, came up to it, and I said, why don't you divorce? And she said that Mark would kill me first before he divorced me.
Footage from Ted Voigt's testimony was also played from 2008. He testified that Julie believed that Mark was trying to poison her, but she was scared to tell people because she didn't want to be seen as crazy and have her children taken away. Ted said he had offered Julie a place to stay at one of the Voigt's vacation homes if she ever wanted to leave Mark, but he said she died just 3 weeks later. And that's where we're going to stop for this episode. Next week in part 2, we'll be covering the rest of the witnesses the prosecution put forth, as well as the entirety of the defense's case. We know that letter Julie wrote wasn't admissible this time around, but would what Julie told numerous friends and neighbors still hold the same weight? What will the jury's verdict be this time around? This episode was researched and written by Law and Crime staff with additions by me. I want to thank everyone for being so patient with me while I was on maternity leave. I'm happy to say that I am pretty much back, however, only part-time until we get our childcare situation all settled, which is likely to be more towards the end of August. So if you hear my colleague and wonderful writer Matt narrating a few more episodes here and there, that doesn't mean I'm taking time off again. It just likely means it was too difficult for me to get out and be able to record. Thanks again for your patience and for all of the well wishes. I swear I have the best listeners and I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm also taking listener requests again. So if you have a case you'd like for me to cover, please let me know. You can email me at podcast@courtjunkie.com, or you can contact me on social media @courtjunkie on Instagram or @courtjunkiepod on Twitter. I have some listener request cases coming up that we're currently working on, and we can always use more. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.